It is the Pac-12 championship game on Friday night with USC and Stanford in a rematch after the Trojans took care of business at the Coliseum in September, 42-24. We bring in Ryan Abraham from USCFootball.com to help us break this one down. Ryan, how you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good, Mark. Can't believe 2 days away from the Pac-12 championship game. Friday night, 5 p.m. in the Bay Area. The traffic's going to be a little rough, but should be a really interesting game.
No question about that. In looking back at what transpired between these two teams back in September, I was surprised at the time, not that USC won the game because I think they have a more talented roster, but just the nature of the game that they really pushed Stanford around on both sides of the ball. They really imposed their will offensively. The defensive line controlled Stanford's massive offensive line. It was a game that was won in the trenches, and USC, I don't want to use the term dominated lightly, but they did in spurts and won decisively.
They did. And if you look back at USC's 12-game schedule, they went 10-2. That's by far the best game they played all year. And that's back in week 2. So I don't know if that's a great sign for the Trojans. They never kind of were able to match the intensity and the dominating factor that they won that game. Now, Stanford was coming off a trip to Australia, and they ended up losing the game after USC to San Diego State. They played a lot better, obviously, since then. But I watched the replay again last night, and seeing, 300 yards of rushing offense, 300 yards of passing. Stephen Carr, the true freshman, going over 100 yards. Uchenna Nwosu batting a whole bunch of balls from the linebacker spot down at the line of scrimmage. And it just, you see, that was really the most complete game that this USC team has played. Now, that was Keller Chris, too, also for Stanford at quarterback, and not KJ Costello, who I think is a much better player. A little surprised David Shaw took as long as he did to kind of put Costello back in there. So, and trying to beat David Shaw twice in the same year is not going to be, it's not going to be an easy task. So this USC team's got to somehow find what they were able to do in that week 2 again, in week 13 for this, or week 14, I guess you could say, for the championship game. I don't think it's going to be easy.
Mark Rogers TV talking USC football with Ryan Abraham from USCFootball.com as the Trojans prepare for the Stanford Cardinal, a team that had dominated them in recent years up until that September meeting at the Coliseum. It's great, Ryan, that you rewatched the game last night, so it's fresh in your memory. What strikes you in watching USC from week 2 versus 3 months later, and what strikes you about the Trojans being a different team or the same team now versus then?
I think on the offensive side, if you look in that game against Stanford, and we talked to Clay Helton about this afterwards, they were 10 of 12 on third down, and that's a key. When you're playing Stanford, they limit the number of possessions in the game, and you have to be really efficient on offense. The first half alone against Stanford, they had 5 possessions, 1 interception by Darnold, but 4 touchdowns. So they really got the lead, and you were able to keep it and really kind of keep Stanford. They out-Stanforded Stanford, really, in that game. And we just haven't seen that kind of play again since then. Their third down production has dropped off significantly since then, a huge drop-off. They've been really inefficient on third down. And I think that's kind of set them up for some of the some of the failures they've had during the season. They beat these teams, but they just haven't looked all that great doing it. And you talk to the players like, hey, we're 10-2, and they're kind of happy about it. But the fans a lot of them are really upset. They're like, why aren't you blowing some of these teams out that you really should be doing? And I think Clay Helton and his staff can kind of push all that talk away with a win against Stanford. If you finish 11-2 and win the Pac-12, I mean, that's a really significant factor. They lose this game, I think he's going to lose a lot of the fan base because they haven't felt all that good, Mark, about the wins that they've been getting. So getting a win here is going to be, I think, immensely important for Clay Helton and the whole staff.
And the mindset of the fan base comes and is largely connected to the expectations at the beginning. And the expectations for this football team, whether fair or unfair, were tied directly to the college football playoff. And I think this is unfortunate because I think we have a better system today, even though I don't love it. I certainly have my issues with the playoff system, not including all 5 conferences, but it's a better system just because it affords 2 more opportunities than the old BCS system. But we've become so focused and centric on this college football playoff, and everything's toward this college football playoff. I hate that it's diminished conference championship games, except for if it's connected to the playoff. Yeah, you got to win your conference to get to the playoff, most likely. But the conference the Pac-12, that's a certain brand of football. There's a certain respect and a certain camaraderie within that league and a certain number of rivalries. The Stanford USC rivalry really not given the credit nationally that it's due, but there's a lot of bad blood between those programs and have been in recent years. So that being said, do you think that the fan base is disappointed that this team, regardless of whether it might have been an unrealistic expectation to count on the playoff, is disappointed with just a Pac-12 championship game appearance?
I think there's a bunch of them that are. It's kind of funny. There's a divide in the fan base. There's a whole bunch of people that never wanted Clay Helton to be hired to begin with. And I see their argument. Like, his resume didn't match up to what a USC job would really be, but he's won 10 games his first 2 years. I think if he wins the Pac-12 championship, they haven't done that since 2008. You have to give him and his staff and this team a lot more credit. But you're right. The expectations coming into the season were making the playoff or bust. You lose that game on Friday night to Washington State, but then really getting blown out on the road by Notre Dame. I think that kind of reset expectations. And some fans are like, you know what, making the playoff, even if you could squeak in, probably wouldn't be the best thing for this team. And I really felt that way. But now you're seeing all the teams at the top are flawed as well. And who knows, USC is a very talented roster. Maybe they could make a run. But even up until today, I get people tweeting me like, well, if you do run these numbers, USC can still make the play. I'm like, no, that's like right now, there's no way they can make it in. But even, up until this last weekend, maybe if Alabama won and some other things happened, maybe USC would have some kind of really slim shot. But you're right, though. That's what the focus ends up being on. And I think at this point, because they got blown on the road by Notre Dame so bad, really the focus should be just try to win the Pac-12 championship game. That's a great next step after winning the Rose Bowl last year.
Hey, Ryan, while we're on the topic of the playoff, do you think it's unfair that USC is being discarded? They have 2 losses. Auburn has 2 losses. Ohio State. Certainly Auburn's got it right there in front of them in the SEC championship game after winning the 2 games that they've won in recent weeks over Georgia and Alabama. For Ohio State, a lot of credit's given them based on whatever, name recognition and so forth. But USC's in that. I don't even think the brand name should tie into it. You could be TCU, you could be Kansas State. It should be all about resume and performance on the field. But even that, USC obviously ranks right there with the blue bloods of college football. Do you think are you surprised? Do USC fans feel shunned? Pac-12 fans in general feel shunned that there's really little regard given to this game counting toward that?
I think the Pac-12 did a lot of this on their own. I mean, they sent Stanford to Australia to start the season. All their top teams had to go on the road on a Friday night, and they all lost. And I think the Pac-12 have done that to themselves. Like, what if USC played Washington State when they weren't in the middle of a 5-game, home stand, and USC had to go on the road and then go on the road again after that? We've seen, Stanford lost on the road Washington lost on the road to Stanford on a Friday night. The Pac-12 have done this to itself, and I think they've creating this parity, but you're diminishing the teams at the top. I don't think you need to help. The SEC doesn't need to help Alabama, but they don't want to hinder them. They want to keep them in Auburn available for the playoff. And I don't think the Pac-12 really did that. But I think, USC, because they have that brand name, if they were close, I think they could get the benefit of the doubt. I mean, last year they jumped up ahead of Colorado to make the Rose Bowl. I think the committee would help them if they help themselves. It's really hard, though, with that blowout loss to Notre Dame. And they just don't have the quality wins. They've beaten 3 teams with a winning record so far. They don't have some of the really nice wins that some of these other teams do. So I don't think it's a big shunt, but I think a lot of it the Pac-12 has kind of done to itself.
Talking USC football with Ryan Abraham from USCfootball.com. Join him right there for the very best coverage for the USC Trojans as they prep for Stanford in the rematch in the Pac-12 championship game this weekend. Ryan, you just mentioned it, 2008 being the last time that USC won the Pac-12. If somebody asks me who's the gold standard in the Pac-12 as a program, not this particular team, but just who's the marquee program, I don't even hesitate. I say USC. But we know what Stanford's done. We know what Oregon was doing there in the Pac-12 North, and the South has yet to win a championship game. It's only been around a few years, but still it's like 5 years running. It is a bit alarming that not alarming because the program's in great shape, but it's just surprising that the USC Trojans have not won the league since 2008.
Yeah, it is. And I think back in 2011, they had a really good team with Lane Kiffin. They went 10-2, but that's when the sanctions had kicked in and they were ineligible for postseason play. I think like they could have allowed USC to play in the Pac-12 championship game, just not a bowl game, but they held them out of that one, and UCLA ended up going. But this is probably the best chance the South has had going into it. It's just always seemed like the North has had that advantage. All those teams I think are beatable. It's I guess for USC, it's probably unfortunate that they have to play Stanford, who they already beat, because I think it's going to be hard to beat them twice. I think either Washington or Washington State they would have matched up a little bit better with, and those teams are coming on the road. USC does have the bye because they didn't have a bye week all season, so there's a little bit of an advantage there. But Stanford, they played Notre Dame on Saturday, so they have a short week, but it is a home game basically for them. They're just 12 miles away or whatever from Palo Alto. So I think this is the best shot for the South to kind of break through. And, now that Chip Kelly's at UCLA, maybe you'll see some more, fight out of them. Arizona State looked like they might hire Herm Edwards, which I don't think they're going to be competing for a while if they do that. But it was nice for Colorado to get that kind of rogue 10-win season last year. But, they're back down to earth at 5-7. But it's usually, if USC's down a little bit, it's going to be tougher for the South.
So, Ryan, that 10-2 USC team under Lane Kiffin, was that the team that beat UCLA 50-0 and then sent them to the Pac-12 championship game?
Yeah, I think that was the same year.
That was just odd that a team that just lost 50-0 to its rival and was like 6-6 was going to the conference championship game.
Yeah, very strange. And then USC fell off the cliff the next year. They were like a preseason #1 team and ended up being 7-6. And yeah, it was that team didn't handle the expectations all that well. USC fans think this year USC didn't handle expectations well, like coming into the season. At least they were 10-2. They didn't go 7-6 and lose their recruiting class and losing the Sun Bowl and all that kind of stuff that happened in 2012.
Yeah, they were down there in the cold in the Sun Bowl against Georgia Tech, I believe. Yeah. Not wanting to be there necessarily.
I did not. I was actually at the Army All-American Bowl covering like the high school players then, and like Max Brown, a bunch of the 5-star players that were committed were all in that game. And they're on the practice field, and I'm getting updates on my phone of the game, and I'm like, they're losing. And the players that are committed started to figure this out at in San Antonio. They're like, what is going on? I'm like, yeah, I don't know, man. It was pretty nuts. It was a pretty huge fall off that year. So not for USC fans, not as bad as the fall off in 2012. If you look at this year winning the Pac-12 South as some kind of fall off.
No question. Fun discussion with Ryan Abraham. You can join him on USCfootball.com for the best in Trojans coverage as USC faces Stanford. Before we let you go, Ryan, how do you think this one's going to play out? What are the keys for SC?
I think they got to get back to that third down efficiency. Certainly, they were really good against Stanford. And because, like I said, they limit those possessions, you have to be efficient on offense. So if there's something like 5 of 15 on third down, I don't think USC is going to win. So I think USC definitely needs to control the ball on third down. Limit Love to maybe one long run. They did that. He had a 75-yard run against USC in the first game. I think he had 160-something yards, but that kept him in contain a little bit. And really some of the passing plays, some of the downfield passes, they throw a lot of fades. The USC DBs have to be disciplined. They've given up a lot of big plays. So just not let Stanford get those big plays and kind of control the ball and be efficient on offense. I think special teams will probably be a bit of a wash, but being efficient on offense, you can't squander possessions against Stanford because you just don't get that many of them.
Okay, Ryan, enjoyed the discussion. Ryan Abraham from USCfootball.com. We appreciate you jumping on board and helping us break down the Pac-12.
Anytime, Mark. Thanks for having me on.